Bremner here with Cultivating Success, and I just got back from vacation, and I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about kind of my perspective, a new book I'm reading, and today is just going to be a solo podcast, so it's just me today, but really excited to talk to you about the things I've been thinking about since I've been gone. So if you've been listening to any of my stuff, you know that I highly recommend that you take some breaks out, take some vacations, and allow your brain to sort of relax and recharge. And I know in the beginning, that might be a smaller vacation. So I just did 8 days in Hawaii and Oahu, and it was wonderful and really relaxing. And I understand in the beginning that it might be a smaller vacation, but still very important. Even if it's a long weekend and even if it's within your state, I highly recommend at least every 6 months taking a little break, thinking about it can be thinking about your practice or your life or your stress levels, because if you don't take some perspective outside, it's going to be really challenging to see what's going on. And like I said all the time, Dr. Shawn always said, business problems are personal problems in disguise. And I do really believe that. So if you can fix some of your stress and personal issues, I promise that it's going to go much better in practice. So on vacation, I always like to read a book, physically read a book. So I do a lot of audiobooks I listen to on my commute, but I think when I'm on vacation, especially on the beach, I like to physically read a book. I think it's something a little bit different when you actually are turning the pages. And when I'm on vacation, I like to read books, sort of like a bigger picture book. It's usually not like a business book that I like to read. It's sort of an altered perspective because, you're in a different place. So I think it's a really good opportunity to have your brain, somewhere else, and that you're able to kind of change that perspective. So I read this book, which I love. And I'll tell you, I read books all the time. And very rarely do I think a book should be added to what I call my associate reading list. But this book is going to now be a requirement for my associates because I think it is wonderful. So the book is called Be Water, My Friend. And it's written by Sandra Lee, who is Bruce Lee's daughter. And if you've ever studied Bruce Lee, or if you ever, kind of remember his martial art movies, he was a philosopher, not just a martial arts expert. He really started thinking about life and how martial arts fit into life, which I love. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with martial arts and why I think it applies not only to life, but to practice. So don't worry, you don't have to actually have been training in martial arts, but in the book, she uses a lot of analogies about how training and combat specifically really sets you up for success in life because it's not instantaneous gratification. In fact, it is a long, lifelong study of understanding about, preparing yourself for life and combat specifically about how to protect yourself, but it's also an art. And, chiropractic is an art. So if you take time to develop that art, it will be rewarding in the end. So, the reason I really like this book is, like I said, Shannon gives a lot of life lessons with martial arts. And so first, let me tell you a little bit about my background and how I've found that martial arts are important. And I think if you've listened to my last podcast, I think I said getting punched in the face is a good thing. And that's like literally getting punched in the face and then like metaphorically getting punched in the face. I think they're very similar. So my whole life, since I graduated college, basically after I finished collegiate basketball, I was always looking for something else to kind of challenge me. So the first thing I got into when I'm in my early 20s was boxing. And I loved boxing. So not only is it just an amazing workout, I mean, you just see results very quickly in your body, but it gives you a chance to get instant feedback when you make a mistake. And when I'm talking specifically about me and different sports like boxing and later jiu-jitsu, I only train if it's like real life combat. I don't really enjoy just kind of training just to get in shape. Whereas I do that from time to time to get in shape. I really am fascinated about like actual life and how it would apply if you were actually in a fight. So when I first started learning boxing, I used to do a lot of sparring. And what I would do a lot of times is I would help girls that were training for Golden Gloves. So Golden Gloves is like the amateur highest level that you can reach in an area for your weight class. And so I knew that I didn't actually want to get into like fighting as a profession. I knew that wasn't the right track for me, but I wanted to get as close to real combat as possible. So helping me train these girls. So, there were obviously rules. It's not like a cage fight or anything, but understanding that it wasn't just like punching someone as hard as you can. In fact, people who have aggression and they get into fighting, if any training fighting, they would learn very quickly that they don't know what they're doing. And you can't just put all your effort into fighting, because what's going to happen if you have no control, if you have no discipline, you're going to get punched out, meaning that you're going to punch the other person, they're going to block all those punches, and you're going to get tired. And what I found very quickly is when you make a mistake in boxing, very instantaneously, do you feel the mistake? So if you make a wrong block or if you try to do a wrong punch, you instantly get hit in the face. And I know that can seem kind of aggressive, but the reason I think it's good is because if you're in business, a lot of things go wrong. And most things actually go wrong. Most of the time, you actually don't succeed in something that you want to do. And it's only these few times that you actually hit a home run. So you have to get really good at not reacting. And if you watch fighters, if you ever watch a fight, they're getting hit in the face and they're just brushing off them. It's like it's not even happening. It doesn't increase their anger or their aggression, at least good fighters that doesn't happen to, because they're just understanding it's part of the round. It's part of what's happening. And I think if we can apply that a little bit to chiropractic practice, sometimes I think young docs especially get really attached to the outcomes. And if you can just kind of let things brush off on you and not let them emotionally charge you, it's going to be better in the future. And the other martial art that I got into later, I'm a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and I used to do tournaments until my body just couldn't do it any longer, was jiu-jitsu. And I love jiu-jitsu because it is, in my opinion, the most real world fighting. If you're like in a bar and someone comes and like attacks you, like they're not standing there like in some sort of stance ready to punch back and forth like in the movies. That just isn't possible. And if you hit someone with your bare hand in their face, you're gonna break your hand. I think there's a myth, you see boxers and UFC fighters wearing gloves. It's not to protect the other person's face. It's to protect your hand. So that's just not real world at all. Whereas jiu-jitsu, especially for women, is the most, in my opinion, the most real world self-defense, because it is actually structured for a smaller person to use leverage against a bigger person. And it's a grappling sport. So if you don't know what grappling is, if you watch UFC, it's when they're on the ground, kind of like what you probably think is the boring part of the fight. But it basically allows you to use your leverage and your skill set to be able to tap the other person out or to be able to get them to submission. And so I love jiu-jitsu because it really is a chess game. And again, you have to get really comfortable if you start competing at jiu-jitsu, where someone might have a position on you that they're either about to choke you or about to put you in an armbar. And you have to be really relaxed and calm. And you just think about like, what would be the next move to do to get out of this? And again, it's just like life. Sometimes you're in a bad situation. You have to remain calm and be able to get out of these situations. So, my personal opinion about combat or learning to fight is I think that it just applies to life. It makes you tougher and it actually gives you the discipline. So when Shannon Lee was talking about her father, Bruce Lee, he only would train combat that was actually real world combat. And he kind of got a lot of grief for it, I guess, back in the 60s, because he was doing Kung Fu. He grew up in Hong Kong and they had very rigid, strict rules about what is Kung Fu and what's not Kung Fu. But he realized that, hey, sometimes if you're in a fight, it doesn't matter if you are, using the technique perfectly, because the most important thing is that you survive the attack. And so he started transitioning away from this traditional rigid structure of Kung Fu and started kind of creating his own Kung Fu, which was similar, but it was all about, is this actually going to help me in a fight? If someone actually tries to attack me, am I going to be able to defend myself, and am I going to be able to win the fight? And over his life, he sort of got obsessed with water. And so the book is called Be Water, My Friend, because it talks about in his life how he applies everything to water and the complexity of water and really how it just kind of applies to everywhere in life. And so in this book, she talks about when Bruce Lee was younger, he was very fiery and he was really good at martial arts, but the part that he wasn't very good at was the gentleness. And, I personally have struggled with the gentleness part of martial arts my whole life. I think that where I get into trouble is when I try to make a submission that maybe isn't there, or I try to like go be aggressive when it doesn't need to be. And if I actually was a little calmer and waited, that I wouldn't burn myself out and I'd probably be a little bit better. And, that's why I personally really like reading books, because in my life, I do struggle with the gentleness side of life. And it's very important to have both, to be able to use your aggressiveness and get what you want, but at the same time to be more pliable and more flexible. So other books that I've read that have these similar concepts, I think we talked about The Happiness Advantage, which is one of my associate reading books. Also, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior is another book that I really like. And so when I'm on vacation or when I'm in kind of a place where I'm not normally in my life, I like to read these books because it reminds me about the importance of patience and gentleness and being pliable and having a different perspective, because sometimes I can really get on something and just like hyper focus on it. So I think that this book is really good, kind of just bringing that out and having you realize. So if you struggle with sort of like the gentle side and patience, I'll tell you, if you're in business, you probably struggle with that. I think this is a really great book to kind of just give you perspective. So one of the things that it talks about with water is like water is the perfect yin and yang. So when they talk about yin and yang in Eastern philosophy, it's two parts of a whole. So it's not necessarily, I think, the Western society can think it's opposite of each other, but it's really two parts that you need for balance and wholeness. And water is just that of itself. So water is very strong. When I was in Hawaii, our last day, we went to this beach. It was so beautiful and it was great because the surf is strong, the current's strong there. So the waves are big and they crash. So there's no tourist on it on the beach. And it is just blue water, gorgeous mountains in the background. So basically only locals go. I happen to grow up around water my whole life, whether that's the ocean or strong rivers and streams. So I'm very comfortable in rough water. So we were able to go out there and swim. We got knocked around, got held down a couple times by the waves, which I kind of think is fun. But man, just feeling the strength of water. Water can be so strong, but at the same time, it can be very gentle. It can be still. In a lake, it's not moving at all. It's still being strong or gentle. You need it for life. We all need water, but it can obviously kill you if it wanted to. And the patience of water, because over time, if you look at a canyon and there's a river in the bottom, the river had cut through that canyon millions and millions of years. I think it's pretty amazing when you think about water and the balance that it is just being itself. And so I'm going to try my very best in this next 2 months going into the beginning of the year of trying to be a little more balanced, because I personally struggle with that. And so if you struggle a little bit, I would highly recommend this book. And so the thing it talks about is when Bruce Lee was younger, he was like 15 years old. Like I said, he was like really fiery, really good at martial arts, but he sort of lacked the understanding of the patience and gentleness. And so his professor said to him that he actually had to take a week off of training. And he couldn't train, wouldn't allow him to come into the dojo to train. And it really made Bruce Lee super mad, because he was like, I don't understand. Like, I'm the best in the class. I'm your best student. Like, why don't you want me to train anymore? And he didn't want him to train because he wanted him to have some perspective. And so he went out on the lake and he canoed out, and he was so angry and so frustrated. He started hitting the water as hard as he could, taking all his frustrations out. And all of a sudden he had this like epiphany. And no matter how hard he hit the water, he could not hurt it. No matter how hard he tried to grab the water, he could not grab it, because water just became pliable and it wouldn't let him penetrate at all. And he just sort of had this perspective like, man, that is the yin and yang of water. And if I could become more like that, I would be a stronger martial artist. And, later in life, he became a better person and more calm because he had a pretty bad temper. And throughout his teachings and his philosophy, he sort of embodied the be like water. And every time he sort of got into this place, this bad mental place, that he would go back and reflect about that time that he had on the lake punching the water and how that really got him nowhere. And water really was this amazing thing. And he also wanted to practice the art of detachment, which I think is really interesting. And this is going to sort of lead us into how I think this applies to chiropractors. But I think that when you are really detached to the outcome, then a lot of times you become disappointed. And I know that happens to me all the time. I want a certain outcome, I work for it, I plan for it. And if it doesn't happen, then like my whole world is like, terrible for the day. But the reality is that the outcome is eventually going to come to where it's going to be something as positive for your life. And sometimes, especially with patient care, So like if the patient's coming in and you are so detached to the outcome of their care, you are going to have headaches and struggles, because the reality is that some of these patients are attached to their own sickness, which sounds crazy, I know. But, let's just say, for example, someone who's had migraines for 30 years, and those migraines have become a part of their identity. They're like, they even use it in the language, right? I have migraines. Not, oh, I deal with migraines or I'm suffering from migraines. I have migraines, right? I've been diagnosed with that. This is the kind of patient that's going to come in. They're going to bring you like their CTs, their blood work, all of their, history, past history. That patient, they might get better in a chiropractic. They probably, like a lot of people do. But if they're super, super attached to their, whatever the disorder is, whatever diagnosis that they have, they actually don't want to get better, because you would take away their identity. I know it sounds crazy, but if you are more attached to the outcome and you want them to get better more than they want to get better, man, sometimes that just doesn't happen. So in practice, something that I've learned is to do my very, very best to get the best outcome possible, but it has to be detached. I have to be detached from the outcome, because if you become attached, that you're just going to go crazy. And some people, a very small percentage, but some people, they're just not going to get better no matter what, because their issue lies a little bit deeper inside them. And I know that might be hard to hear, especially because, chiropractors get on stage and like, oh, we help the sickest of sick and we do this, and chiropractic is going to help everyone. And where I agree that that's true, some people just don't want to be helped. And that's unfortunate. But if you attach yourself to the outcome of that one person and you forget the 99% of your other people that do want to get better, you're going to get hung up on that 1% in your office. And so something I would just really recommend is trying to think about being detached a little bit from the outcome. And in general, not only are chiropractors very attached to the outcome, but they're also very, very rigid on the views of their world. And they don't communicate chiropractic very well with the general public. And it's an interesting thing, because there's two main reasons that chiropractors see 10% of the population. You hear that percentage. Hey, maybe it's up to 15, maybe it's as low as 8. Let's just say 10% for giving an average. But, the past 100 years or so, chiropractors have basically just stuck with seeing 10% of the population. Now, why is that? Well, my opinion that there's two main reasons why we have not gotten into a higher percentage of the general public wanting to see chiropractors. The first one is that they refuse to look at marketing and sales. Now, we're not going to talk about that today. My last podcast was Jack Justice. We really went into marketing and communication and sales and how that's so important in communicating with the general public. Let's talk about the second reason. And I think this is a huge thing that's a problem in chiropractic, is that chiropractors make people feel stupid. They make them feel stupid for their decisions in health. They make them feel stupid for what they're thinking about health, for stupid for like their daily lives and what they do. Because as chiropractors, you're weird and you're different. I mean, I'm weird and different. And I like that about myself. So I'm not saying change that, but understand, if you're trying to communicate with somebody who does not have or does not share your worldviews, you have to become an expert at using a language and basically having a translation. You're speaking two languages. But what chiropractors love to do is that they love to be right. They love to be right. They love to educate. You hear that a lot of times. Well, they don't get it. Well, they just don't get it. Well, guess what? They're never going to get it. Why would they get something that they didn't spend their whole lives learning? Now, I think they can get your body can heal itself. I think that's probably simple enough. But, a lot of chiropractors, they expect their patients to like understand chiropractic the way they understand chiropractic, which is crazy. And so I think if we could be a little more mentally pliable and flexible, we would see more people. We would see a higher population. Now, I'm not saying being flexible with your care. Please understand the difference. For example, I do strict knee, chest, upper cervical, meaning I don't do any full spine. I use thermography. We check to see for some sort of thermography difference, subluxation. We do an adjustment when it tells us to do an adjustment. We don't do an adjustment when they don't need an adjustment. And I don't have them talk me into doing an adjustment. So my care is very strict. So I guess you could say it's rigid in that way. But the way I communicate with my patients, I use language like treatment. I use language like your migraines, your vertigo. We help people with vertigo. Now, some chiropractors cringe at that. But the reality is I'm just using language that they understand. Once they're under care in my office, then therefore my care is not flexible, it's not pliable. But in explaining it, and here's another thing, I cannot handle how much chiropractors are like screaming at you that you need to educate your patients and have them say subluxation and like talk about vaccines with them from day one. It makes you sound crazy. Now, don't get me wrong, if people have more questions about their health and they want to dive deeper into understanding what their body is capable of, absolutely. We can have the conversation and talk about that. But you sitting down and like thrusting down your education about chiropractic down their throat, all that does is deter them from coming in, A. And if they do manage to stomach all of that education, they sure as hell aren't going to refer anyone in your office because they know that the other person is going to have to overcome all of that crap that you're shoving down their throat. Now, if you use a different strategy, which is empowering them, letting them come to the decision themselves, now they're going to refer a lot of people. They're going to love coming in. They will come in forever. And I think that we need to be a little more pliable and flexible, especially understanding that the worldview is not the same. I give this example all the time, but it's like, if I have a certain political view and I'm sitting across from another person that has the exact opposite political view, do you think that there's something I'm going to say all of a sudden on some hot topic that they're going to be like, oh my God, you're right, I'm going to change my opinion? No, they're not going to change their opinion at all. Now, if they learn to know you, let's say that we didn't talk about our political preferences, they just learn to know you as a person. And then later, maybe you bring up some topic and they're like, oh, I don't agree with you, but I can see your side. That's way more likely than you just like coming at them and throwing ideas and your thought process, your worldviews, because they're not the same. But that's what you're doing to your patients, is that you're cramming down your worldviews to them and they're not responding because that makes no sense. And like I said, if they have questions later and their worldview starts to slowly change over time, then that's fine. We're happy to have a conversation about, like, hey, there's a reason why there's commercials, every other commercial about pharmaceuticals. There's a reason why the medical industry, I don't say medical doctors, I don't think it's true, but the medical industry, pharmaceutical companies don't want you to be healthy, is because they make no money on you. Now, if we come to that conversation because they let it there, totally fine. But if we open the gates with that conversation, that's a really tough thing to overcome for them because they don't want to feel stupid. They don't want to tell you, oh, I've been taking drugs for 20 years. Well, are you going to see me as a patient? Am I going to get harassed every single time I come in here? Every single time I said, oh, I did this or I did that you don't agree with? But for some reason, even to start care in some chiropractors' offices, they like require this patient to shift their worldview before they even allow them in the office. Now, you're really going to struggle with 10% of the population who already has that worldview, right? 10% is like already drank the Kool-Aid. They love chiropractic. But the thing is, if we really want to help people, we really want to make an impact, we got to go after the 90%. And in my office, I see probably 80 to 90% of my patients have never seen a chiropractor before. And I love that. I love that percentage. I love those type of people because they don't have a preconceived notion of what chiropractic is. They're just sick and they don't want to be sick anymore. And so we allow them to come in without cramming education down their throat and allowing them to be empowered and understand that they can get better and there's another way. But they probably inside already knew that, because if you try to get someone on the far, far end who just wants to take drugs, there's some people that they're like, I'm taking drugs. This is great. I don't want a different way. Now, the people in the middle are the like, I'm taking drugs because I don't know that there's another way. I'm going to a neurologist because I'm scared and I'm just getting these tests because I don't know what else to do. But I know inside that there is probably another way. I just don't know what it is. Now, that patient, that's perfect. It's chiropractic. They didn't know that that's what it is, and they don't know the language and how we would talk about that if I was talking to another chiropractor. But if you can talk to them in language that they use and understand, they're going to love the office and they're going to come in and they're going to be great patients. And so I think as a profession, we need to get away from just being right. It's crazy. I mean, chiropractors love to be righteous. They love to be right. They would rather be right than successful. And it's crazy, but it's true. I see, a lot of chiropractors go on stage, in fact, and they want to just be righteous and they just want to be able to like, I'm right and you're wrong, but it doesn't matter. They don't even want to be successful. I mean, of course, they probably want to be successful, but they would rather be right and righteous than do that. And unfortunately, It's a lot of like really what we would call quote unquote principal chiropractors. And I myself am a principal chiropractor, but I also enjoy and understand learning about marketing and sales and understanding that people aren't going to use the same language as me. So you can absolutely be 100% principled in your philosophy and in the way you practice, but be able to communicate differently. And if you just don't get hung up on being right all the time, then I think that you're going to do a whole lot better. And then you're going to be able to do things like marketing and sales and communication skills because you're not so hung up on, this is the right way or this is the only way. And so my suggestion to you is allow your mind to be more flexible and not so hung up on semantics and having to like be this righteous person all the time, proving that you're right. And, a lot of chiropractors love to prove that like we're right and medical doctors are wrong. And it's just sort of ridiculous because I frankly just don't care. Like when someone's like, well, what do you think of like medical doctors? I'm like, I have no opinion. In fact, I have medical doctor patients. And like if they came into the office, like imagine this, the medical doctor comes in my office. If I'm like, look who's here, it's the medical doctor that's been killing all these people with all these drugs and giving all these surgeries. Aha, I've got you now. Like, do you think that medical doctor wants to become a patient? No, they don't. This new patient I have, she is the head of internal medicine at a huge hospital. She's physician of the year and she's got horrible vertigo. And she came in the office and what did I say? Man, that sucks. I bet it's really hard to treat patients when you have vertigo. She's like, yes, it is. And I don't know what I'm going to do because I can't see patients anymore if this keeps happening. So I said, guess what? I can help you so that you can help patients. Now, did I get into like what you should be doing and the care that she's providing? No, I addressed her like a human being, took care of her like I would any other patient. And eventually down the road, I can almost guarantee you she's going to see that like, maybe at least for vertigo, she's going to say, hey, medication is not that helpful because it wasn't helpful for her. Right. And so now I've created an ally instead of making myself some righteous person and that she like wasn't able to get care because I think that that's absolutely ridiculous. So, in general, I myself always need to be working on the gentle side and I'm going to try to be more like water, a little more detached from the outcome, a little more pliable with my mind. And I do think that like reading and taking breaks on vacation helps with that. Right now, I feel pretty calm and at ease and balanced because I've taken that time to relax a bit. So definitely take the time to do that. And so, I guess my ask for you guys is try to be more like water. Not only will you be more successful, but you'll be happier. You honestly trying to go and combat the world is not a happy place. You're just going to get constant negativity. There's no reason to do that because you can help people be a principal chiropractor and you don't need to have this righteous, holier than thou attitude. You could just be a human being helping other human beings. So that's my ask to you guys. That's all I've got for you. Be water, my friend. I would highly recommend this book. It was awesome. And I'm going to always be recommending books to you guys, to help your mindset and books that are going to help business and sales. So I can't wait to recommend some more books to you guys. This is Cultivating Success. We do a podcast the first and third Monday of the month. Stay tuned for more information. All right. Bye, guys.